Vamos a empezar y tengo igual el honor de presentar a Nancy Swanson, the LIIQ Foundation, and she will talk on blended capital, grants, debt, and equity. También tengo a Franklin Mora, Open Road Alliance, on debt. Oh no, he's not coming. Oh, he's not coming.
Ted Levinson is.
Oh, but Ted, pero aquí? Sí. Oh, okay, but we will have Ted up here with us, Ted Levinson, y a Greg Krupa de Nobulis, Ecuador, on pay for performance social impact incentives. Marcia Chong. And we will have Marcia Chong on equity. Y va a ser moderado por Ana Gastelum, de New Ventures. Y que también organiza el FLI, ¿no? ¿Sí? Okay, big applause. Un aplauso grande para todos ellos.
Oh, can you hear me? Okay, perfect. Let me just set the timer because I'm a bit nervous on that. Okay, perfect. So thank you for the introduction, Lucia, and for the CLIIQ team for having us. I'm very honored to be here presenting, while moderating a panel with such amazing people. As Lucia was saying, we have Marcia Chong, who leads the fintech and financial health efforts of Village Capital in the US and the Americas, and she's actually from Ecuador, so representing. Then we have Ted Levinson, who's from Beneficial Returns. He's founder and CEO, and it's an organization that provides loans for social enterprises alleviating poverty within Latin America. Big applause, please. Over here we have Nancy Swanson from the LIIQ Foundation. She's one of the founding members and executive director, and if you didn't see the session yesterday, they do an amazing job within the health space for women in communities within Latin America, so big applause there. And lastly, we have Greg Krupa, our entrepreneur at the panel. He's founder and CEO at Nobulis, alumni from our New Ventures network, so I'm very happy to have you here. And they do an amazing job within the dental care, the health space in Ecuador for the working class, and you'll tell us more about this later on. So first I want to start with each of you guys. Thank you. First, okay, let's see who we have in the audience. So if you can raise your hand if you're an investor or come from the investment space. Okay. What about entrepreneurs? Okay. What about neither of those? Okay, great. Perfect. So I'd like to start with each of you. Talk a bit about your insignia type of capital, the type of capital that represents or makes unique your institution. And for your case, I know you've raised very innovative financial tools for your enterprise. So also if you can tell us about the characteristics of these unique instruments. So we'll start with Marcia.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, good. So at Village Capital, we are an interesting model where we are both an accelerator and have a venture capital fund. And I'm supposed to talk about equity, but the way that our fund is structured, we provide flexible capital. So it includes equity, it includes convertible debt, and also includes this instrument that's growing in the US called revenue share, which we are really interested in and think it's more sustainable for companies, especially companies that aren't growing 10x, 20x, that aren't unicorns, that represent zebras. And so we provide different types of capital. And what I can say is what makes Village Capital different is that we run accelerator programs in different areas. So for example, I lead our fintech practice. And so each year I'm looking for 10 to 12 entrepreneurs that don't compete within fintech. And they go through Accelerator, and at the end, they go through this evaluation process where they're evaluating each other on team, business model, traction, revenue, on their investment readiness as a company. And then at the end, they say, okay, based on this evaluation, these are the top 2 companies in our cohort to receive an investment from Village Capital's fund. So we call that peer selection investment, and there aren't other accelerators doing that. We were the first ones to come up with this model about 10 years ago. And the whole idea is, founders on the ground are the ones that understand the problems and oftentimes want a space to get feedback from other founders. And so we're giving that investment power to the founders themselves rather than our investment team.
Thank you. At Beneficial Returns, we provide good old-fashioned debt. So we make equipment loans of $50,000 to $500,000. So established social enterprises can acquire more equipment and grow and deepen their impact. And so what we offer, which is unusual in Latin America and Southeast Asia where we operate, is we offer long-term loans. So we provide capital for as long as 7 years so that social enterprises can grow. But beyond that, you'll hear lots of fancy forms of finance today at the panel, and we are the antithesis of that. But when you look in the greater market, this is what has grown so many businesses in the world, is the ability to borrow money and then pay it back slowly over time and to grow the business faster than it would grow on its own.
Great, thank you. At the CLIIQ Foundation, we've really been interested. We're a very small foundation, and we've been interested in being catalytic in the region with our mission to improve the health and economic self-reliance of women and their families in Latin America and in the US. And we're also a spin-down foundation, which means we're at year 12 of a 20-year time frame to utilize the capital within the foundation. So we've thought about how do we use our capital so that we can create sustainable solutions in the communities where they reside. So we've thought about, and it's not fancy because we do debt too, but we work with, we find and finance early stage health social enterprises. And as Andrea Baer presented yesterday, we've gotten much more interested in finding women's health enterprises, which are harder. And we look for organizations. They can be for-profit companies, they can be nonprofit companies. We work with microfinance and health organizations that want to scale their health programs as an example. And we bring together generally grant capital so that that business or company can innovate around their business model to deepen inclusion or deepen the way that they're creating a sustainable path for their business or organization, and debt to help grow the company. And Greg's company, we've had an eye on Greg's company for a while, is just a really good example of still early stage, but close to break even, is driven toward impact. We're an impact first investor. So we do direct investments, and we're also an investor in several funds that are on lending working capital, primarily debt, to social enterprises in Latin America and a little more broadly. And in addition to the capital, we say, like, what do we have in our toolkit as a foundation to provide companies and organizations what they need? So we have someone on our team that helps think about the social impact. Some organizations and companies are very advanced in their thinking about what those indicators are and how they measure it. And others really need support around that. And we help them think through, I don't, because it's not my area of expertise, but my colleague does, what's meaningful and relevant for the organization or company, both on the social impact side. The financial information is generally easier to get. And then how do we, how are they able to share that with their potential investors? So technical assistance not only on the social impact side, and also access to networks. We work with informally, but we hope to kind of regionally think about how we work more effectively with impacted investors in the region. So we bring together investors, which we'll be doing at SOCAP this year because they have a Latin American focus, to catalyze capital in the region so we can be more effective in bringing together entrepreneurs together with the right amount of capital, because there's not a lot of kind of early stage debt financiers and that also are using grant capital in this way. So we're trying to align the capital continuum along where the opportunities are in health and in women's health.
Thanks. I just wanted to start by saying, aren't we glad that at last night's filming of Night at the Museum, the sequel, that 20th Century Fox finally decided to get rid of Ben Stiller and Robin Williams and replace them with amazing women, Michelle and Dani Arevalo? Actually, before I jump into it, I actually want to thank all the incredible women at IMPAQTO. The first healthcare company that I founded here in 2012, there was no ecosystem. I mean, it was a desert. And I moved to Chile, and I came back a few years later, and it had just flourished into this thing that we're seeing now in front of us. So I wanted to thank Dani and Michelle, especialmente por todos los labores que han hecho aquí. I know that Novelis wouldn't be in the position that it's in right now. I know that we wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation. So, anyways, I'm Greg. I'm the founder of Novelis. Just to give you a quick little background, because I'm the entrepreneur of the group, which is why they put me in a special chair. We were founded 5 years ago with my partner Paul Quinones, who's back up here in the fifth row. We provide on-site oral health services for the working poor. We do this through a really innovative model with mobile and portable devices, as well as stationary clinics at the worksite. We work with employers who employ typically low-income workers in rural areas or peri-urban areas. We convince the employer to sponsor the cost of preventative treatment every 6 or 12 months. The problem is that folks don't go to the dentist preventatively. They go when it's too late. They need to extract a tooth. You could imagine all the other health consequences associated with not having preventative or good personal oral hygiene. So we're there every 6 months. The company sponsors the cost of preventative treatment, and then any other additional treatment, we do it at a very low cost, lower than market cost, even though it's high quality. And we provide 6 months financing through their paycheck. So the employer is able to discount it from their paycheck. And we also work with family members on weekends. We'll have parties for kids. And this allows us to reach the larger community. So to date, we've bootstrapped from 1 mobile clinic to now 4. There's actually a dental center of excellence inside of the Quito airport. I highly recommend, if you're flying through the airport, to check it out. It's in the commercial center in front of the airport. And it's the same concept there. We work with all the employers, but it's also open to the public in this case. So if you want a cleaning or a whitening before you take off, bienvenido. I see some yellow teeth out there. No, just kidding. Yeah, so you had mentioned that we've recently embarked on acquiring some more innovative capital. We were self-financed, and years later, when we finally figured out this model that's allowed us to see over 11,000 patients in their workplace with just over 18,000 visits to date. Last year, we received our first financing through some local partners, and then from there, we received money from the IDB through a technical cooperation grant. Definitely, the IDB has been very instrumental in creating an ecosystem here as well. I know that through IMPAQTO, they've also made their scale possible. So I want to thank the IDB as well. I don't know if Paula is here somewhere in this audience. I've been looking for her, but I can't seem to find her face. So from there, we were able to scale a small scale, and just recently, we actually were awarded a $250,000 grant. We're still signing the paperwork, so maybe it's a little too early to say, but what the heck, I'm an entrepreneur. We get to just say whatever we want, I guess. It's called CLIIQ, Social Impact Incentives. Very, very innovative model. What they're doing here in Latin America, I believe we're the 4th to receive money from them, is that they say, okay, you're an impact organization. Well, you're in this pioneer gap. Maybe there's not access to traditional financing, or you don't have access to capital investors. Maybe your model's not profitable yet. All right, so we'll support you in this gap that you're in by giving you an incentive, a $250,000 incentive over 2.5 years, where if you can hit these KPI measures that we developed together, based off of your social impact, and then also raise capital, usually about $1 million or $1.5 million, then we'll disperse these funds. Obviously, this serves as an incentive, a social impact incentive, not only to the impact group, but also to investors. So we're in that process right now of seeking who those investors are going to be. We have some interested parties, but we're really looking to make sure that it's the right group in terms of philosophical alignment as well as capability to help us scale. So I hope that helps, and yeah.
Thank you. Okay, perfect. And now I want to ask you, Ted, you were talking about how you're the traditional viewpoint of this panel. So I'm just wondering, what would you say to our audience of entrepreneurs? What should they be asking themselves in order to know if they're the right fit to ask for this type of financing? And then I want to contrast it with the new version of Nancy.
Sure. Well, maybe I'll share the two big questions that we ask ourselves when we consider making a loan. They're pretty simple. The first one is, what is the impact that the potential borrower has had and that we project that they will have? And then the second question is, will they be able to repay us? It's very simple. So there's some analysis that goes into that, but those are the two fundamental questions. And unless we can get a positive answer to both, we don't proceed.
Okay. But as an entrepreneur, if you were on their shoes, why should they be asking you for capital?
Ah, okay. Well, you know, our investors participate in beneficial returns because they want to see successful social enterprises grow. I think one of the big challenges that we face in the world is that social enterprises are addressing huge problems, and they're all almost uniformly tiny. So we need to find the best ideas and help them grow. Finding aligned capital is critical. So, and I think it's what you were just mentioning, that you can't just find the person who will provide you the quickest or the cheapest capital. You also need to find it from investors that have similar goals to yours. I've seen a lot of social enterprises that have failed or that have lost their focus or that have lost their founders because investors have had different goals than the founders. And so making sure that there's alignment is something very critical for all investors. And I encourage you to be interviewing your prospective investors just as they are interviewing you.
Perfect, thank you. And you mentioned something really interesting. Before I pass you on the mic, I know that you guys do a lot of, or are very interested in blended finance, and you were mentioning how you need to be aligned and you're in the goals, and your investors have to be aligned in the goals. So what types of challenges does these new schemes of blended finance present when you have someone from like a public resource and then a private resource and then an entrepreneur? You know, like, how do they align in a blended finance space?
So I would say I agree with Ted in terms of, and also with Greg, is that we really are interested. I mean, the field is very new. Our interest is in finding partnerships where we can open source and really learn alongside of that organization. And so we generally find, I mean, we're at, thanks to the study with William Davidson Institute, we said, how do we more effectively find organizations or companies that we can support and get to know? But we're generally at the CLIIQ and other places to, first of all, find partners that align with the kind of capital that we have and also the impact that we want to have. So, as an example, Bive is here from Colombia, and they are a nonprofit that's profitable, providing access to healthcare via membership model for those that are outside of the, public health system. They're too rural, and they can't afford private care. So we met with them last year, and they were interested in deepening their reach to women's and women's health. And so we've provided a grant that allows them to work with coffee cooperatives that are working with women farmers and do breast and cervical and cardiovascular screenings. And they have a sustainable model behind that. But there was alignment in getting to know them and hearing directly from them in Colombia where they're working and where they're operating. And next year, there's a potential, because they're growing, to take on kind of a great working capital debt that meets them where they are, that's still very early stage, that probably wouldn't qualify for a social investment fund from Global Partnerships, who we work with as an example. So it goes back to alignment and partnership, and we're really interested in learning, using our foundation as a learning kind of lab and portfolio for the field. And these are partners that are willing to share, because we're seeing other models like Vive that want to learn from what's happening in Colombia. So that's just, I think, alignment, how you want to have a partnership, how you want to stay long term. We use our capital, it's usually a 3 to 5 year cycle of both debt and grant, depending on what the goals are with each of those. And then we are hoping that we are helping that organization connect into that next kind of layer of maybe the Acumen Fund or other funders that are, where they're reaching more growth potential. And we've had several great examples of companies. Tony Carr from Halloran, and Promotora Social Mexico, who are here. We've worked with Sala Uno and Clínicas del Azúcar, and now we have a maternal health company, Reina Madre, so we meet them where they are, at the stage that they are, and the capital's flexible in that way to be able to do the things that the entrepreneur is able and ready to do at that point in time.
Thank you. And you said, you were mentioning alignment, and I'm just curious, with the peer-selected model you guys have, so these peers on the entrepreneurs that are in your accelerating programs, they're doing this eligibility process for you guys. So how do you make sure that, how do you make sure that they are actually aligned with your investment thesis or the quality that you seek in your portfolio?
Yeah, that's a great question. So our team, both the Accelerated team and Fund team, we do a lot of diligence and recruitment beforehand, where ultimately whoever gets selected from the 10 to 12 companies we feel comfortable with. So that's the first phase. But then once you're an entrepreneur and you're going through the accelerator program, our core program is focused on investment readiness. And so how to train other founders to think from the lens or viewpoint of an investor. And so as I look at the entrepreneurs here today, one of the tools that is the heart of our programs is called Viral, or in Spanish, Viral. And it's a public tool that we're using both to educate entrepreneurs on how to communicate where they're at in company maturity. So for example, when you're communicating your team, this is the level that you're at, how to communicate that to investors. When you're talking about your business model, this is where I'm at, how to communicate that, and other factors. So we go through that Viral chart, and entrepreneurs, not only are they able to communicate where they're at, but the tool tells them, okay, if you're a level 3, you should really be approaching angels. You're not ready for seed stage venture capital funds, or if you're a higher level, you may be. So it's a tool for them to also identify what types of investors may make more sense. And then on the other side, it also helps investors better communicate how they're making investments in entrepreneurs and what factors they look for. And then the other thing I'll say is, for Village Capital, we look at a lot of different factors. Yes, we care about impact. We look at team. Team is very important because we're focused on companies before Series A. And so we're looking for companies that have direct lived experience with the problem they're trying to solve. So does the founder or someone else in leadership have that experience? And then what I also encourage you all as entrepreneurs is, look, I'll be honest with you, the venture capital space is has a lot of issues. We need more inclusion, diversity. Like, there aren't a lot of people like me, and so think about, if I'm partnering with this investor, are they representative of the communities? Like, why are they deploying this money, and how can they help me? And yeah, think about, I agree with like the alignment and the partnership aspect as well.
Thank you. And you were speaking about financial readiness, and I think that's a very interesting point, Greg. Some lessons learned on when to know, as an entrepreneur, what type of tool to raise your capital through or with. In your experience, I know you've done a lot of bootstrapping, but were there some key aspects that, looking back, you say, oh, I wish I had considered this, or it's helpful that I question this aspect of the financial institution?
Perfect. So I think that there's a lot of value to bootstrapping, right? Understanding the value of every step of your model, of suffering through each expense, so that later, as you scale, you can responsibly spend that money. And in our case, for example, we bootstrapped for 2.5 years, which meant going without salary. It meant mobilizing in buses, which we wouldn't have been able to do that today, although all of our clinics are shut down right now, unfortunately. You know, because there's such a lack of access to capital here, I mean, it's kind of a tricky question to say, you know, what's the roadmap, because there's just so few options. A lot of them are right here in this room with us right now. But definitely when you're operating in somewhat of a pioneer gap, and you know, you may not be creating a model that is profitable or won't be profitable for a few years, especially if you're advocating for your user in a way that doesn't allow you to be profitable, then you definitely have to look for some sort of blended finance or seek out grant opportunities for those first steps to then eventually be able to get to you know, maybe some seed round investment. But I would say, given that we're sitting here in the Ministry of Finance, that I would challenge the government, especially because they speak so much about entrepreneurship these days, to create some sort of fund that could help bring and attract capital down to Ecuador to support entrepreneurs like all these wonderful people in this room. I think that in this particular moment, that's the sort of thing and news that Ecuador could use.
Perfect. Before I move on, because I'm a very curious person, so I have a lot of questions, but I know the audience is too, so I don't know if you guys have any questions that you'd like to address in this panel before we move on. Sometimes I feel like it's too rushed and you guys don't have any time. So any questions from the audience? And if you can address them to a specific panelist, it'd be great. Otherwise, it's that awkward moment.
Hello. I don't know who to address it to, but I think it's for all. So I guess from your point of view, since you're the ones with the wallet, how is it possible, or is it possible to invest in a company that maybe doesn't have all the key metrics that you're looking for? Or so I guess my question would be, how much risk do you take sometimes when the model is new, when it's not a copying model of something working in another place, but so how much risk do you really take in believing the purpose and the model, etc.? Thanks.
Well, I see that as two questions. So we have underwriting criteria that we publish. You can find it on our website. We will bend, right? So we all have seen job descriptions, and we've also seen dating sites where you list what you want, right? That might not be what you accept, but it's what you want, right? And so I think it's very reasonable for entrepreneurs to recognize that they don't have to meet every single qualification, but I think it's also important to acknowledge that. So I love it when an entrepreneur approaches me and says, I see, I have 3 years in business. We work in Latin America. We're looking for equipment. We want to borrow $70,000. However, we don't have $1 million in revenue. We have 600,000, but next year we think we're going to get there. Okay, I like that honesty. You've almost met our requirements, so I'm very happy to speak with you. And even if we don't make a loan now, we may in the future. So I'll just answer the first half and pass it on to someone else.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say from our point of view, we are willing to be very risky at times and invest in things that haven't been done, and it's based on like we're early stage, so seed, like pre-seed, and it's on who is in the team, how thoughtful have they been in terms of like the market, do they understand it? Again, do they have direct lived experience with the problem? We're willing to be very risky at times. That being said, though, outside of Village Capital, every like venture capital fund is different. And I'll be honest with you, like venture capital is supposed to take on a lot of risk. We're supposed to invest in new innovations and ideas, but you're gonna see a mix of investors that are like, I don't know, like. You don't fit this, and then you'll see other investors who are like, I love the team, I don't care about anything else, I'm gonna invest. It's very subjective. It's a very subjective industry, and so you'll have a lot of different answers.
Someone had a question up there?
Hi. My question is also to Ted. You mentioned your old slide that I like it about debt and how you manage the collateral or when you are making a loan to overseas company.
Yes.
You base the loan in US. You have how is the operational formula that you have used?
Okay, I'll try to answer your question quickly. So the number one thing that we're looking for with collateral, we're not thinking about taking that collateral back, although we will. What we're thinking about is whether that collateral is going to make money or save money for the organization. That's the number one thing that we're looking at. But when we do make loans, and we have loans in Chile and Brazil and Guatemala and Mexico and later this month in Paraguay, we do take collateral and have legal documentation in the countries where we operate.
Anybody else has a question? I think over there.
I'm exercising.
Well, hello everybody. I think my question is for all of us, for all of you, is that if you have any mechanism to measure the impact that you have in a territory. So I'm wondering that investment has a lot of power in moving some processes along, and all of that has an impact on an ecosystem, for example, in a natural ecosystem. So if you think when you have a lot of money that you are trying to put into entrepreneurs, if you think about the added impact that you can have in that ecosystem, and I'm coming from the ecological, let's say, area, and I always wonder that big investments, for example, infrastructure or agricultural development have a huge, huge impact in ecosystems. And I think venture capital and impact capital can have that type of impact as well. So my question is that if you consider those, the quantity of carbon emissions that your entrepreneurs are emitting, for example, the quantity of water that it will use, and that added value in an ecosystem per se.
We're not, I mean, we're starting to look at reproductive health and its link to climate change. From an indicators perspective, and it was mentioned yesterday, there's some tools that are being used that I think many are familiar with, you know, Jen and Gears, and Andy has a framework, and there's many new gender lens investing criteria and metric tools. For us, we've had to customize the metrics for each portfolio company or organization because they're different. And then we kind of can aggregate those up around access to healthcare where it didn't exist before. But we're starting to think about those because they're really important, and we're seeing organizations and companies taking those considerations, the environmental considerations into their companies, but we haven't been tracking those yet. I don't know if Village Capital is with their companies, or Ted, you are.
Yeah, the impact question is always really complicated. What I can say is, similarly to what Nancy was saying, we measure, like for each company, we have 2 to 3 impact metrics that are customized, because we also want to make sure that we're not making them just come up with a metric that they have to report. Like, it has to be core to their business functions. But then we also have aggregated metrics like the carbon emissions. We do measure that. But to be honest, because I actually, before Village Capital, I worked on some of the first social impact bonds, which were like really rigorous and complicated. And what I learned is that the venture capital field, when it comes to measuring impact, is all over the place. There isn't necessarily one standard way of doing it. And there needs to be more work in terms of figuring out, like, what's the fund's impact, and then for accelerators, what is their impact that they're having on entrepreneurs? Because it's different. Like, a company's impact is different than like an accelerator's impact in that ecosystem.
Sorry, it's just my timer says we still have time, but I see 0 minutes left there, so I just want to make sure. Is it 0? Okay, sorry guys. I think I set my timer wrong. Sorry about that. Thanks again for coming to this session. Just one last thought from each of you of what would you like to see, or invite the audience in order to see a more vibrant ecosystem in the impact space in Latin America. So, Greg?
Well, I think that this young man's question to Ted actually created something that I don't understand why is not available in the market. Where's the Tinder matching impact investors with social entrepreneurs? Why aren't we swiping?
I agree. We've with this last study that we did, it's really how do we better understand the ecosystem with each other, because it's so hard to find, the right match. It's like a forming marketplace, and so we've been actually talking about that with other investors. How do we kind of bridge so we can understand, and then how do we really understand what entrepreneurs, getting investment ready seems so critical that we're seeing in women's health. We're seeing some amazing organizations that have scaled, that are sustainable in women's health, but require some assistance in getting investment ready, and haven't really thought about the impact capital or been connected to it in the region. So we're trying to broaden our view and think catalytically around how do we work as a region, focus specifically on women's health in the next 8 to 10 years that our foundation has, and really keep an interest and focus in bringing together those in the ecosystem, including the accelerators that can help.
Can I say the word bullshit? So the idea that there's a financing gap is bullshit. There's a little bit of money at this end, a little bit of money at that end, and a huge everything in the middle where there's far too little capital. And so I understand how frustrating it can be for social entrepreneurs. So the number one thing we need, a lot more money in this field.
Yes. So I was thinking about this. Something that's been on my mind and I think could be relevant for people here is that, yes, we need to continue to build the investment early stage or entrepreneurship community here in LATAM, but there's also an emerging movement within the US. So like Latinos living in the US, building funds for LATAM or trying to invest across regions. And that's something that's very top of my mind. Like, how can we as a community across the Americas better support each other? And so there's this group, Latinx VC. I encourage you all, like, if you're thinking about raising capital or getting to know, like, who are the investors, think about, who is in your community in LATAM and in the US. we need to build better bridges to support our ecosystem. And then the other thing is like we need to build a more inclusive ecosystem, not just for entrepreneurs, but for like the investment community, and have investors that represent like everyday people. So yeah, I encourage you all to think about like the communities across the Americas.